Okay, we'll get everybody coming in. I'll try to share the presentation. We'll be moving. Let's see. Oh, I see Mark got on. That's good. He's our special guest tonight, so that is good news. Let's see. We'll let a few more people jump on. I don't know, those of you who are on, if anybody wants to unmute and tell us where you're from, that would be great.
I'm from Superior, Montana.
And what's your name?
Ayla Henderson.
Hi, Ayla.
Hello.
Right. Anybody think let's see, do we have anyone from Missoula on here? Anybody from, I was just in Havre today. Anybody from the High Line?
Me, sorta.
Yeah.
I graduated from Havre High School, so
okay.
Sort of counts.
Yeah, I was just up there. All right. Well, we got a group from Butte. Okay. For that group in the register from Butte, if your microphone isn't working, are you still able to hear me? Yes, okay, great. All right. We'll let a few more people come in.
So this is Jennifer McCloskey.
Hi, Jennifer.
There's some video as well. Hi.
Oh, there we go.
And my daughter, Kelly McCloskey, is also participating, but she is in the orchestra and she's actually playing at the Butte High graduation tonight. So she couldn't be here.
Oh, wow. Well, very, very fun. Oh, we got someone from San Diego that joined us. Well, I think we so far have our farthest away attendee. Anybody else have graduation this weekend? I think Bozeman's is on Saturday. Ayla, you have graduation this weekend?
I had one yesterday. It was my cousin's.
Oh, your cousin's, very fun.
I'm pretty sure another one this weekend.
Very fun. Okay. Graduations are always a good time. All right. And I guess I should let you guys know my video says Brett Schomer, but I'm actually Emma Tracy. We share this 4-H account, and I see Elisa's on here too, so she can tell me if something goes horribly, horribly wrong. This is kind of our first shot at doing this from our office, so you'll have to bear with us as we're figuring this out. Well, at least on my end, Brett's the expert on this one. Okay, trying to think other questions to get us going. Who has something fun planned for the summer? You can enter it in the chat or shout it out. No, Ayla doesn't have anything.
Well, we're doing something every weekend, but it's a surprise for us what we're doing.
Oh, well, that sounds very fun.
That's about it.
Oh, we got some camping. Yeah, I don't know if anybody was able to go camping over the last long weekend. We had a lot of rain here. Okay. All right. And I think with that, oh, we got gardening. That's a good activity for this time of year. I think with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I am going to try to share my screen through Canva. We'll see if it actually works. If not, like I said, this is our first night, so we will work out some of the kinks as we go. Let's see. All right. Turn off the tunes. So you guys are all in the first of the 5-part series for Montana 4-H beekeeping. Oh, we still have music going. All the way down. There we go. Our special guest this evening is Mark Jensen, and I'm going to introduce him again in a little bit. But we are very excited about this program, and the whole goal of this is to let you connect with experts around the state in beekeeping and pollinator health, and share some of the really great resources that Montana has, even if you live in some of the farther reaches of the state. So you would be able to do beekeeping as a project if you're in 4-H and you want to go to fair. And I'll be sending out more information what that would look like, and you can talk to your local agents if you want to do a presentation about beekeeping. But these Thursday night sessions are really going to be an opportunity for you to meet and connect with these experts. So I encourage you to think of questions throughout the week, and you should have a list of who all the presenters are. So I'll briefly remind you that tonight we have Mark Jensen with Smoot Honey. So he's a commercial honey producer. Next week, we're going to have Dr. Michelle Flanagan, who's a professor at Montana State who specializes in bee virology. The following week, so we're up to the 16th, we're going to have Alyssa Piccolomini, who's the Montana State entomologist. On the 23rd, we'll hear from Abby Saeed, who's a Montana State horticultural specialist. And on the 30th, we're going to wrap it up with some games with the Gallatin Pollinator Initiative. So we have a pretty diverse spectrum of our special guests. So try to be thinking as we go through this series who you might want to ask certain questions to, and you can kind of plan ahead of what's coming down the line. I do want to remind everyone, we'll see as my slides progress here, just some logistics of the online platform. We are recording this, so when you are speaking, you will be recorded. So be aware of that. Please mute when you're not speaking. Keep your video on if you can. It's just nice so the presenters can see you. They know who they're working with, and it's a little more interactive. Be respectful, as we all are with our online presences, and then be aware of your surroundings. And all of you guys are pro at Zoom at this point, so you've got it down. With that, I will introduce our special guest for this evening. As I mentioned, is Mark Jensen, and I had asked for a headshot, and that's a pretty awesome headshot. So I think that's a great way to get going. He's a commercial honey producer with Smoot Honey. And I first encountered him, I think he was on Montana Ag Live. So I know he's excellent at education and outreach. And with that, Mark, I will turn it over to you, and I'm going to stop sharing. So you're center screen.
All right, thank you, Emma. I'm going to apologize ahead of time if my voice doesn't work out. I'm recovering from COVID, and I've got the sore throat action, but I think I'm going to be all right. So we're going to have some fun tonight. So like Emma said, my name is Mark Jensen. I'm one of the owners of Smoot Honey Company. You can sort of see that behind me there. I'm not very good at, there we go. One of the two owners of Smoot Honey Company. We're a family-owned beekeeping operation in Power, Montana. We've been operating here in Montana since 1964. My father-in-law and his dad started the business in 1964. In October of 1964, they purchased an existing beekeeping operation that had so the bee operation in Power has been here since the 30s at least. So it's been around a long time, the honey operation here in Power. So like I said, we're a family-owned honey beekeeping operation, honey producing operation in Teton County in Power, Montana, and we run a little over 5,000 hives of bees, which makes us kind of a medium-sized commercial beekeeper. There's lots of beekeepers that are 10,000 hives or 20,000 or 25,000 hives, and so we stay around the 5,000 to 5,300 hive range, and we produce honey in and around the Great Falls area. If anybody, because Power is a tiny little town, so Superior is even bigger than Power, Ayla. Anyway, we have about 186 people in town here, but we do have a K-12 school. So, but anyway, we produce honey in and around the Great Falls area, about a 90-mile radius around here. Most of our production comes from clover and alfalfa and sandfoin and canola, among some other wildflowers and things of that nature. So we are what's known as a package operation, which there aren't very many of those left. And what that means is we start our bees every year with, we start with a package hive, excuse me. And what that means is it's little 2-pound box of bees, and we put it in a beehive, and we grow them until they're big enough to make honey. At least we hope they'll make honey. And then we have 5,000 of those every year, more or less. So trying to think what else you need to know. That's just real brief. I guess that's a brief startup. How does that work for a start, Emma?
I think that's great. Yeah, we'll let you kind of rest your voice again. We really appreciate that you came on. I know that this is not ideal presenting conditions. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about what does it look like to harvest honey, and how does it go from the hive to the jar?
Sure. I don't have any slides to show you that. It's easier to see than it is to explain, but I'll do my best. So we start every year in April with bees, and we hope, like I was saying a minute ago, we hope that they grow to be a hive with between 8 and 12 pounds of bees in each hive. And a pound of bees is equivalent to about 3,500 bees. So 3,500 bees is a pound, roughly. And so we start with 2-pound packages, and we grow those to hopefully 8, 10, 12 pounds. Maybe the really big ones get up to 15 by the early part of July, if the weather behaves and all those other things that go along with beekeeping. And so through the summer, then the bees will start making honey. They just finished making dandelion honey. Dandelions, of course, bloom in the springtime, and so the dandelion, at least in our area, the dandelions have just stopped blooming and have gone to seed now, so there's no more dandelion honey. But that's a good plant for the bees to build on, which means they build up or grow by making dandelion honey, and then they bring the pollen also from the dandelions. And so they take the honey and the pollen from they gather from trees and other things this time of year as well. And then they start, the hive gets bigger. They we call it brooding up, and which means that the queen lays eggs, which then go from egg to larva to pupa to adult, and more bees hatch, more bees hatch, more bees hatch, and that's where you get to the 10 pounds of bees. And hopefully somewhere in the early part of July, it has rained and things are still green, although it doesn't look promising in our area right now. But if there's blooming plants, and the bees will go out and work those plants, they'll bring in the nectar and fill up their bee boxes, their honey boxes. And so then and as the summer progresses, we stack honey boxes on top. And if you're driving down a country road sometime, a 2-lane road, they're easier to see than on the freeway if you live near the interstate. But you can see yards of bees sometimes off the side of the highway, and you'll notice them as the summer progresses, they get taller. About every week to 10 days or so, a beekeeper will go out and because the bees are filling up the boxes with honey. So the beekeepers will go out and put another empty box or 2 empty boxes on top of the hive to get taller, to give the bees more room. One, first of all, to make honey, but also room to expand their numbers. And because if you get too many bees in too small of a space, they'll decide they want to swarm, which doesn't do anything good for anybody except for the bees. You lose half your hive and then all your honey production basically when you have a swarm. So I was trying to stay ahead of that. It doesn't always work that way, but if you are getting swarms, that means that they're doing good work and they're really making honey and growing and doing what they're supposed to do. Sometimes it's hard to keep up with them because if the conditions are just right. That's not a problem this year, unfortunately. But so as the hives get stacked taller, then hopefully they're filling up with honey. Then sometime in the late part of July, if everything goes just right, we go back out to the bee yards and we take those boxes that are full of honey off. We load them on a truck and we bring them into our warehouse in Power, and then they go through our extracting plant, which if you can imagine, I suppose most of you guys haven't done chemistry yet in school, but if you can imagine a merry-go-round, or if you've been on the gravitron at the fair, so that's how we extract. And so it's a big centrifuge, and the honey throws out of the combs. Basically, it's a big machine that we use called an extractor, and it's a 2 or 3 part process. And anyway, we get that machine gets the honey out of the combs, and then it goes into settling tanks, and then it goes into barrels for storage, and then at some point it either goes for sale or we package it ourselves into our own containers.
Cool. Very, very cool. I think I had no idea that bees, so 2 pounds of bees could grow to 10 to 15 pounds of bees in, what is that, April to July, 5 months maybe? That's
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, in 2 to 3 months, you should be able to have, a good 3 high box of bees, by the first part of July, I suppose, on average, if everything's going the way it's supposed to.
wow. Yeah, that's pretty remarkable, that kind of growth. I was thinking too, when you were talking about dandelion, if you could tell us a little bit, what's the difference when you see, like, at the store, this is dandelion honey versus clover honey versus wildflower honey, and what does it mean for those of us consumers?
Well, sometimes it doesn't mean anything, honestly. It depends on who packaged the honey and whether they're being fully truthful or not. There's, without getting into too much detail, sometimes when it says clover on the label, it's got clover honey blended into other honey. And so clover is a clever marketing tool. And we don't put clover on our label per se, because the bees make honey from whatever plant they want to make it from, whatever's producing at the time. And we do have a lot of clover in our area, but not every year. And so, anyway, consumers like to see the word clover, and that connotes a light table grade, good tasting honey. And so people see that on the shelf and they want to buy it, but don't be fooled. But the easiest way is to, I guess, to buy local, honey that's produced in your local area or within your state, and and it's packaged within your state. In Montana in particular, it's easier to get honey that's been produced here, because there aren't a lot of large packers here. If you're in the grocery store and you're buying honey, that's check the label and see where it was packaged at. And if it was out of state, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not what it says it is, but more local packaged stuff, you're more likely to find more accurate labeling, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, but to answer your question about varietals, so there are 300 and some odd different varietals, I think, just in the United States, and which we don't necessarily see in Montana because our growing season is really short. There are lots of different varieties, but the honey is not extracted and packaged that way because you can't really do that, because our growing season is short and it's fast and furious, and whatever's blooming at the time when the bees are out and they're searching, whatever's blooming, whatever's producing nectar, that's what they're going to go get, and then they're going to bring, if it's 5 different floral sources, they'll bring that all back to the hive, mix it all together, and then we extract it and it stays mixed together. And so in Montana, most of our honey is kind of a blend of all sorts of different plants, like I say, mainly in our area anyway, alfalfas, clovers, some sainfoins, some canolas, some wildflowers, things like that. But other states such as California, you can have different varietals, like the citrus, oranges produce honey, and that's a specific time of year. And you know that you're making citrus honey because you've got your bees in an orange grove and they're bringing in nectars. And then you know when the bloom stops that their orange honey, anything that the bees have put in their box at that point is orange honey. So you can extract it and call it orange honey because you know that's what it is. Or in Louisiana, for example, Tupelo honey is a thing. And so the Tupelo plant, for example. And so because you can see that they're blooming at that point, and that's the thing that the bees are working on, and so you know that you've got those varietals of honey, and you can get those. It's harder to find them in Montana, but they are available, different varietals of honey. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's great. I've always wondered when you see like what is so special about like clover honey, and when they mark that down. And I know I can keep asking questions, but I want to open it up to the group. This is your guys' chance to have a real live honey producer right here. If you want to ask any questions about beekeeping or anything else that Mark might be able to answer for you. So go ahead, you can unmute your video, or you can write in the chat and I'll try to keep an eye on that.
Tough crowd.
This is Jennifer. I'll jump in. So one thing I don't understand is how long does a queen last? Are we supposed to replace the queen? What's all this stuff about like swarming where a new queen comes about? How does that happen? And will that happen? And how does that interplay with getting a new queen? You follow my question, my line of questioning?
Yep, I probably should have taken notes. No, I think I can answer that. As far as how long a queen lasts, that's a really tough question anymore. Most commercial guys replace queens every year, once a year, because lots of different reasons, but queen viability is not what it used to be. Queens can last and be viable up to 10 years, and good breeder queens, for example, which a breeder queen is a queen that grows other queens. Basically, they use her stock to grow other queens. So they can be good up to 10 years or so. It's difficult with mass-produced queens to get somebody that stays viable for more than a year, maybe 2 years. That's just the way it is now because of genetics and tons of other pressures like mites and other stuff, depending on where you get your queen. But you can, if you've got a backyard hive, you can monitor that queen, and as long as every spring, every summer, she's laying a good pattern of eggs and seems to be doing what you want her to do, she's probably as good as, until you notice that she's not anymore. The bees will figure out that she's not doing a good job, and they'll try and supersede her, which means that they'll start raising a new queen. And so I guess that answers that first part of your question. And then as far as swarming goes, if you don't give the bees enough room, in particular in the springtime when the dandelions are blooming and other flowers start blooming and the bees start to make honey, and they're really producing lots of new bees, if they run out of room in the hive, then they will start to make they'll start to make what are called swarm cells, which is our new queens. And so whichever queen hatches first, she'll hatch out and she'll go and kill all the other queens that haven't hatched yet. She'll sting them, and then they will then essentially everybody in the hive draws cards, and there's a 1 and a 2. And if you draw number 2, you go with the original queen. And if you draw card number 1 or whatever I just said, if you get a 1, you go with the first queen. If you get a 2, you go with the second queen. The second queen takes all the number twos and they fly away and they go start a new hive someplace else, which then decreases that population in the hive so they're not so overcrowded. And like I say, that's a natural occurrence. If you're trying to keep your bees big and strong, you don't want that to happen because you lose half the bees, basically. But there's different ways you can mitigate that by either giving them more space. You can split your hive in half, do it yourself, keep the bees and put, basically swarm them yourself. You pull out half the brood and half the bees, move them into a different set of equipment, bee equipment, and then you have 2 hives instead of 1, and you don't lose those extra bees to a swarm. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah, when you replace the queen, do you have to kill the first queen, by the way? Do you pull her out?
Yeah, that would be the best choice, because if you don't, she'll probably, well, there's a chance that she'll go kill the new queen. Yeah, if you don't do it right. So yeah, the idea would be you'd find your old queen, you'd give her what we call the squish test, and that means you squish her by the skull. And then you let the bees, you can let the bees sit queenless for a day or two, just so they kind of understand that they're queenless, and then you can put a new queen in. I wouldn't, you want to, she'll be in a little cage, and they'll probably have what's called a candy tube in the cage. And so it's powdered sugar and water, and it forms kind of a hard candy. Anyway, it takes time for the bees to chew through that. So then that queen can stay in her cage protected, because if the bees don't recognize her right away and she gets loose, they'll probably kill her, because she's not the queen that they have come to know and love, because you just killed that one. And so that gives the hive time to get used to the new queen's pheromones and accept her as their new queen.
Okay, so you just need to buy a queen, not a whole nuke with like 5 frames and everything. Just buy the queen separate at that stage.
In theory, yes. Yeah,
Okay.
if you've got a decent hive, lots of bees and maybe a couple frames of brood, and it just doesn't look good like you want it to, yeah, that's what you would do, is find a queen.
Awesome. Okay, thanks. You got some questions in the chat.
Yep, it looks like your first chat question is what comes from Aaron, and it is, what is your opinion of the flow hive setup versus a box hive?
Well, I've never used a flow hive myself. If it was me, I would not ever use a flow hive. They look really cool, but they're not the coolest thing as far as for honey production goes. They look like they'll be quite messy. If you had it in your backyard, that's one thing, but it would not be a viable alternative for commercial operations. It's far too slow, far too messy. But like I say, I've met the gentleman that invented them, actually, and he's a pretty cool guy, and it's a cool concept. It's just, in my opinion, not viable as far as commercial honey production goes. But if you were just going to have a hive or two in your backyard, if you can afford to have one, because they are kind of expensive, it's worth a try, I guess.
Cool. All right. Next question is from Elliot, and it is, do you have to clean honey and maybe that purification process?
Sure. Yeah, you do and you don't, I guess. When the reason you clean honey, at least when a beekeeper is extracting, is because you clean it to get the wax bits, and there's bee legs and wings and detritus, I guess you could say, beehive stuff that gets in there during the extracting process. Because it's kind of like, if you're familiar with combining wheat or barley or any kind of combining, for example, it's a messy process, and there's a lot of extra stuff, and it has to go through a cleaner and that sort of thing. And so when you extract, the same thing happens. The honey and the wax and the pollen and the bees that happen to still be in there, and things like that, little pieces of wooden honeycomb sometimes jumps in there, and all that stuff floating around in your honey. It doesn't do any harm, but if you're going to put it on your toast, you probably don't want to have a bee leg on your toast. I mean, that's just me, but so when you extract, most commercial operations, and you have this type of thing if you're a hobby beekeeper too, there are different ways to do it, but we have a machine called, we call it a wax spinner, or I guess the actual name is a honey wax separator. But what it does, and it's another big merry-go-round again, like the gravitron. And honey is heavier than wax and the bee parts and all that kind of stuff. And so that all the honey flows into this machine and it spins it around and around. And since the honey is heavier, it throws to the outside of the centrifuge. And so if you've ever been on a merry-go-round and it's going really fast, really fast, really fast, and you're hanging on as hard as you can, and you feel like if you let go, you go zooming off, that's what happens to the honey. It doesn't hang on, it throws out. So, and then all the other particles and things get caught in a trap, I guess you could say. And so all the wax and most of the bee parts and all the other stuff gets separated out of the honey at that point. Then that honey that's now cleaner than it was gets sent in most cases to a settling tank of some sort. And then gravity does its thing where all the little floaties, like if there's any wax bits or things like that left, they'll all float to the top of the honey tank. And then you drain your barrels of honey off the bottom of that honey tank, which is cleaner honey yet. Then most packaged honey will then go through another process where it gets filtered and strained. And the honey that we package, we filter to 200 microns, which is pretty large. And that leaves most or all of the pollens in the honey, but it filters out any stray bee wings or bits of wax or little bits of this or that you don't want to find in your honey container when you go to put it on your toast or mix it in to make your bread or whatever you're using your honey for. So and that's a great big can of worms too, as far as packaging, and there are different levels of filtration and things of that nature too that I won't get into at this point.
Very cool. All right. And the current last question in the chat is from Cheyenne, and it is, how do you winterize a hive?
How do you winterize a hive? You send it to California. I guess I can't really answer that question. I've never done it. We don't winterize. We don't winter our bees here. The only thing that I know that you should do, if you're referring to, I guess, to a backyard hive, one that you had this summer and you want it to be good next spring, for example, you want to make sure that there's plenty of feed in that hive before you put it to bed for the winter. You can look this up online too. There's a zillion different resources. And then also, I think the last speaker of the month is the Gallatin. I'm sorry, Emma, help me out here. The Gallatin.
The Gallatin Pollinator Initiative.
Okay, that operation or any local hobby group will be able to help you with this. I know there's a couple groups in Great Falls. Most of the bigger towns in Montana have a group, or they've got a website or a Facebook page, something like that, where you can get information on how to winterize a hive. But the biggest things you want to make sure you remember are, first of all, feed, because otherwise they're going to starve to death. And then you want to treat them for mites, and that's a tough one because nobody wants to put stuff in their beehives. But the hard part with that is if you don't treat for mites, you're probably going to have a dead hive in the spring, even if you had tons of feed, just because that's just how it goes anymore. And there's not much you can do about it. You can get lucky sometimes and you'll survive the mites, but you probably won't make it the next year unless you treat for mites somehow. And so, and then when we winterize hives, we sell a lot of our bees in the fall. But when we send them to California for the winter, which is how we would winterize them, we make sure that they're heavy with feed, if they have a good late honey flow and they can make their own and get lots of feed in the hive on their own, or if we have to supplement their feed with high fructose corn syrup, we do that as well. We sometimes will hit them with a pollen patty, a pollen supplement, and then a mite treatment, and to keep the mites. Otherwise, you won't have bees when you go to put them in the almonds in the wintertime. So that's a nutshell version of how commercial beekeepers would winterize. It looks like Ayla has a question.
I don't have a question, but I know what you do for the winter time.
Okay.
So you put insulation around them and on top of them. And you also and if it's like their first time, like their first year of bees, you don't want to take out that much honey.
Right.
So they have enough for the winter.
That's good advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayla. And I think maybe Elliot has a great question to bring us home is, can we buy Smoot honey in Bozeman anywhere?
That is a good question. I can tell you, well, you can't buy it because there's a number of different businesses in Bozeman that use our honey. For example, Valhalla Meadery, which you can't use, but oh goodness, now I'm going to draw a blank. But On the Rise Bakery has our honey, and they use it in their granola, for example. And I think some of their bread. There's a restaurant downtown that has it. There aren't any retail stores, no, that you can buy our honey in Bozeman. It's available on the MSU campus at the food service, I know. And On the Rise Bakery, I told you I was going to draw a blank. It's the new tea shop in the new hotel on 27th. Shoot, I can't come up with it. It's steep tea. I'm sorry, I can't tell you, but anyway, that's how you can get our honey so far in Bozeman. But we do have a website. I'll get out of the way there. You can go to.
All right, and I'll put your website and a link maybe to your online options when I send out the follow-up email. And it looks like we have we have the Facebook group for the Butte Beekeeping group that got posted in the chat. But otherwise, unless there are no questions, I know we don't want to stress your voice too much. So if someone has one more question, or we'll try to wrap it up so everyone can get dinner and you can rest a little more. Ayla, do you have one more question?
Yeah. So is it true if like the queen dies and they don't have a good enough egg to feed the royal jelly to, will they invade in another hive?
Well, are you saying if that's what you described as the case, will the bees that are in that hive that went queenless go somewhere else? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah.
Generally, no. They'll just kind of sit there and slowly dwindle away. And then if you're looking at your bees, you can tell that they're queenless after a while, because either like you said, they'll feed royal jelly to a cell and then they'll make new queen cells, and that's kind of how you can see that they're queenless, because you won't see any eggs, but you'll see queen cells. And then the bees kind of will act funny also. They'll first of all, you'll see they just won't look quite right. If you have a good hive that's got good brood, they look a certain way. If there's no brood, they'll be kind of fuzzy and scattered, and they're like they're not concentrating on their job, sort of a thing. And because there's nobody in there directing traffic, they don't have the queen for their pheromones to kind of keep everybody happy. And so I guess I lost track of my thought there. But yeah, they generally won't go anywhere, but they'll eventually die because they're not replacing themselves. Does that make sense? Because there's no queen to make new eggs.
I read a book somewhere that it said if the queen dies, they might invade another hive.
That's not generally my experience. Sometimes they do what's called they abscond, which means they all go away. They all fly to Tahiti or somewhere. I don't know. We see that every once in a while. We'll open a beehive that was perfectly good last week, and you come and open the lid and there's nobody there anymore. You don't know why. But whether the queen went bad and they all went away, or the queen took them all away, or they were beamed up by aliens, or a bear ate them, I don't know. It's hard to tell if you don't see it happening. So but that's the best answer I've got for you.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and chat with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you to everyone who joined. And yeah, let's all give a virtual round of applause for Mark, and have a great week, everybody. Yeah, this was fantastic. You kicked off the project excellent. So we're all excited and jazzed about beekeeping.
Well, you've got a great slate of speakers coming up after me, so you guys will get a lot of good information. And I just spoke with Michelle earlier today, and she's a wealth of knowledge, and so is Alyssa. So I know those two for sure. So good slate of speakers. You guys will learn a lot from them.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yep. Have a good evening, everyone.
Have a good evening.